In the midst of life, we are in death. From whom can we seek help? Our help is in the name of the Lord, who made heaven and earth. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us as we honor the life, the legacy, the spirit, the incredible depth of knowledge and love of a truly wonderful woman. I just knew her as Betty. I guess we should say Elizabeth Hayes Jones Oakberg if we're going to be formal at the beginning. But a person who showed such incredible hospitality and grace and just a wonderful spirit. It is remarkable to last on this earth 103 years, but that is what she did. And just so grateful that each of you is here today as we honor her life and her legacy.
Good afternoon. I'm Bob Cantrell, and I'm a retired pastor who, like the Oakberg family, grew up here in Oak Ridge and in this church. And for the past 11 and a half years, my wife, Marion, and I have had the privilege and blessing of living straight across Eulene Lane from the Oakberg family home and those who dwell and have dwelled therein. And I'm honored to be part of this service with you. Someone has said that the basic rules for any public speaker are to be clear, be brief, and be seated. And with 3 clergy participating, it may be time to pray now rather than later. But in a few moments, I'll read Psalm 46, and I'm reading from a Bible that was given to me here September 25th, 1955, signed by the pastor, J.A. Bays. And I think the chances are very likely that Frank and I, who are the same age, received the same Bible the same days. I know he got a Bible and certainly signed by the same pastor. Early today, as I thought about trying to make some brief remarks, I just was stuck. How do you say something brief about Betty Oakberg, and that's clear and appropriate to the occasion? So I called a neighbor who's lived next door to the Oakbergs since 1992, Betty Neal. Barbara Neal, sorry, Barbara. And I said, "You've known Betty longer than I have," and I said, "Okay," after she shared with me, I said, "Okay, with your permission, I want to use what you told me because it's so to the point." She said, "Well, Betty was so engaged with immediate neighbors on the lane. There are 8 homes on Eulena Lane. She was interested in people, what was going on, not in a pushy, nosy kind of way, but she cared. She just cared. And about her immediate neighbors. But of course, you know her too. You know that the word neighbor applied far beyond Eulena Lane. It applied to this church and her involvement here as a Sunday school teacher, later on as a volunteer in the library. It applied to being a public school teacher here for, 22 years at Glenwood Elementary. It applied to her being a ham radio operator and having the highest license one can have. And so her neighborhood was the planet. And I remember seeing her one day wearing her radio operator light blue shirt. I think it was a Sunday, and I think it was her tradition Sunday morning at 11 to be speaking with international neighbors. And that's the way she regarded all of us who inhabit this globe, and really every creature. How do you say something brief and concise about someone who's so engaged in such a wonderful way? Well, here's the story straight from Barbara. Barbara and her husband Richard, who is also a high school classmate of mine and of Brother Frank's, live next door. Their daughter, Sarah, grew up here in Oak Ridge. And one winter, I think it was evening, it was dark, it was cold, the power was out. Barbara said it was clear it was not going to come back on in a short time. So she was worried about Betty next door by herself, and she knew if she went and knocked at the front door, Betty was not likely to hear her, so she went through the yard and I'm sure stood near a bedroom window and shouted, "Betty, it's Barbara." And she said Betty heard her and came to the door, and she went in. Betty had been sitting. She had a lantern lit and a battery-powered lamp, and she had been sitting and working a crossword puzzle. She was just fine. And Barbara used the word prepared, and I thought, well, you know, that's an important word in the Oakberg lexicon too, with two Eagle Scouts. And maybe you were in scouting as well, Marie. Campfire, okay. Well, the story. The Neal's daughter and son-in-law, who happens to be the priest now at St. Stephen's Church across the street, adopted a child 6 years ago, a little boy, newborn. And Barbara said Betty was so thrilled with this news that she knit a little shawl and a cap, bluish purple. She said, just right for the Mobile, Alabama, cooler weather. And I remembered your telling me, Marie, that she had an adopted older brother, Bob. She knew the impact and meaning of what it was to be adopted on a family and on a child. And so she neighbored and continued to neighbor all of us and our extended families to whatever extent she could. I think of Betty and associate closely with her a fellow named Mr. Rogers. Both have Presbyterian DNA that served them well. And I'm not saying that I regard Betty as a female Mr. Rogers. If anything, it's the other way around. But they both were committed to being neighborly, to neighboring and to being neighbored, that I think gives glory to God and certainly has blessed the human family, including you and me. From Psalm 46. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore we will not fear, though the earth should change, though the mountains shake in the heart of the sea. though its waters roar and foam, though the mountains tremble with its tumult. There is a river whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy habitation of the Most High. God is in the midst of her. She shall not be moved. God will help her right early. The nations rage, the kingdoms totter. God utters his voice, the earth melts. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our refuge. Come, behold the works of the Lord, how he has wrought desolations in the earth. God makes wars cease to the end of the earth. He breaks the bow and shatters the spear. He burns the chariots with fire. Be still and know that I am God. I am exalted among the nations. I am exalted in the earth. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our refuge. The word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God.
Thank you, Bob. What I will always remember, and I think value most about Betty, is how she treated other people. When I first got to know her, I was still in seminary and was blessed to follow in Mahan's steps as the visitation minister, and she just welcomed me. And she never seemed to lose interest in me. So I was always grateful for how she treated other people and how she treated me. No matter what happened to her, no matter what challenging circumstances she faced, she never lost interest in other people. When her world began to shrink because of her physical limitations, she didn't let it shrink. She allowed it to continue to grow by being involved and interested in the lives of everyone she knew, whether those were family members, whether those were church members, whether those were the nurses' aides that were just working, or whoever was working in whatever facility that she was in. I remember when I visited her just 3 days before she died, and after she graciously thanked me for taking the time to visit her, she then said, "Well, tell me about your 3 children." She always asked, even when it was very clear at that point that her 103 years were coming to an end, she still was genuinely interested in my children. I will always remember her tone of voice whenever I called her and she'd answer the phone. "Jenny," she would say. She genuinely sounded so pleased that I had called her. It didn't matter that it had probably been far too long since I had last visited, but her pleasure just always touched me. Simply stated, she made room for other people in her life, in her heart, and in her mind. Oftentimes when people ask you your opinion about something, you know they're just using it as a springboard so they could tell you their opinions. That was not the case with Betty. She truly was interested in what other people thought, and she would listen very carefully. Because of that, I felt seen by her, I felt understood by her, and I felt cared about. And I think that really, really matters, and that is a true gift. I also remember the first time I saw her at Commonwealth after she had had her stroke. And at that point early on, speaking was incredibly difficult to her. But she looked up at me and she said, "I love you." That's all she could say, but nothing else needed to be said. So I am and will forever remain grateful for the lessons that she taught about the importance of being interested and making room for other people. Lastly, I will be singing a song, the Hymn of Promise. And as I was thinking about this song, it occurred to me that a truly wise person and a truly gifted teacher does not focus on giving you answers, but knows the questions to ask. And I feel like that sums up Betty in many ways, and also this song. She recognized that we don't have to have the answers for everything. There's value in simply being open to the questions. Gifted to hear the remembrances, the meaning of those that were closest to Betty, first hearing from her son John and then daughter Marie.
First of all, I want to thank everyone for being here, and also thank those who are watching online. We were able to, hopefully, through the live streaming, that there'll be other people to join, and I know there are people who are joining even from the church in Vienna, where Linda and I attended for so many years. That's Vienna, Austria. But I think it's already been said, how do you talk about Mom 103 plus years? She had been 104 in June. You know, she was so open and inquisitive on so many things, and yet really private and reserved on others. And that speaks to the fact of the result of living through the times of that length of time, from the life of how you lived your life, the social ways of the 1920s. By the way, she survived the first pandemic, and she also survived the second one. And so how do you go about doing that? It's not an easy task, but then again, as I looked at things, it became maybe too easy, so I'm going to have to really be like Bob and be seated soon. But she knew me for 74 years. And I struggled with a lot of early memories as to what were some of the distinct memories I had of Mom. And one just, I think, showed her creativity, and also takes you back to the early years of Oak Ridge when the family moved here in 1951 into the D house that is the one that Bob mentioned on Eulina Lane. And the furniture hadn't arrived yet. And she had 3 kids. and didn't really want us eating off the floor. But we basically did that. She set up, I remember the cabinets. She opened up the cabinets that didn't have anything in them except shelves, sat us in front of the cabinets and put our meals inside the cabinets on the shelves and had us eat our meals that way. That's a distinct memory. I also remember, and this is one of those miracles you would almost say, that in those days we had a trash burning barrel out in the back of the house. I don't know if most people in Oak Ridge burn their trash or not, but anyway, we had a garden, and Mom had been canning something, and there was a big thick glass gallon jug of vinegar that was empty with a lid on it. So what did I do? I went out and put it on the trash fire to see what would happen, not knowing what would happen. I think I was maybe 5 then. And I was standing a little ways away and just watching, and Mother realized what had happened, and she saw that gallon glass jug sitting on a burning fire, knowing what was going to happen, and didn't make it out of the house in time, and the thing exploded. And I remember a piece of glass about that big came and hit me square in the forehead, flat, fell to the ground. I kind of looked at it and didn't think much of it. She did. And so, but those are the types of things that I remember early with Mom. But I remember things that she remembered. I remember the joy when she told us how happy she was when she heard that Lindbergh had completed his solo flight to Paris. And think of all the things she can remember. She lived a lot in the southwest U.S., and she can remember people talking about Pancho Villa's last raid from Mexico. And so she went through 100 years not only of a lot of technological changes as well, you can imagine, from seeing her first airplane to watching someone land on the moon. She was definitely a devoted, steadfast, and loving mother. And as you may or may not know, my brother Frank passed away this last July. And I was trying to think of if anything Frank would say, and I think he would say at least one thing about Mom. After Frank's first grade, in the end of his first grade, there was a big concern about how Frank was able to read, and they were worried, will Frank be able to continue at his current reading level? So Mom, being a teacher, took it on herself to make sure that Frank would finish the summer ready to go into the second grade. And she physically had to sit on him to keep him inside, to keep him reading books. And she succeeded. She succeeded maybe a little too much. She created a reading enthusiast. By the time he left Pine Valley School, he had read every book in the school, and he continued to read and write the rest of his life. I would say, in terms of Mom's dedication, if you were to ask me what would I think, I asked myself, what would be, I think, the toughest thing my mother ever did? And never give an idea to anyone that was tough going on. And that was when she had to re-enter the workforce in 1961. As a single mom, she had to raise 3 teenage kids, and I know it was rough. And there was a 7-year period where she had at least one in college. There was a 3-year period where there were 2 in college, and there was a 1-year period where all 3 were in college. And she toughed it through. She also, I don't know if you ever experienced Mom's sense of humor. She had one, and she would sometimes do it when you least expected. And this is one thing that really sticks in my mind, and I don't know if my sister Marie was involved with this, but one March 31st, and I'm guessing this was in the late 50s, the date's important, by the way. One March 31st, she made cupcakes for dessert. So we all had cupcakes. So we all knew, can I guess that cupcake's going to be in your lunch the next day, the leftovers. And so the next day, April 1st, remember the date, we get back home and are discussing our lunch of the day. Mom had made cupcakes. I don't know about Marie. Did you get one too? Marie got one too. We all of us in our lunches, my father's lunch, my brother's lunch, and mine, Mom had made cupcakes and iced them beautifully, but she made them out of the cold mashed potatoes from the day before. So the fun thing is, my dad realized it right away. I realized it after the first bite and decided, well, might as well eat the icing. My brother Frank said, it was in my lunch, I ate it all. I don't know, Marie, if you ate yours or not. And we also had, she was also excellent with what I would like to call mom words, and Marie may have some others to mention as well, but one time after Thanksgiving, we were sitting around watching football game. And this is right at the very beginning of sudden death overtime. And some mother walks in from the kitchen and said, is this one of those games where you have quick kill? And so quick kill is now a family word we use with football. Another one is back in the early 70s through the Scouts, there was a big concern about teaching people about hypothermia and getting cold and the issues that can come from that. So later, Mom asked me, what about that thermohepia? So we were left with thermohepia for the rest of our lives. And the most recent one was, we were talking about landscaping, and that's when knockout roses were the rage. Everybody was planting them. So Mom said, are you going to plant some of those drop-dead roses? And those, by the way, are still in our vocabulary today. As was mentioned, Bob Cantrell mentioned he lives across the lane from Mom. But next door to Mom was the parsonage for the senior pastor of this church, starting in the early 50s until the senior pastor residence was purchased out on West Outer Drive. So for a long time there, we had a lot of excellent neighbors, and I want to kind of think it helped keep Frank and me a little bit in check. And then it became the associate pastor. So we were thinking of names of the Porters, the Bays, the Seymours, the Hardens, Lovelaces, Smiths, Fowlers, Archer. That's how the Archer family became part of the Oakberg family. But it went both ways, and in a way, and Mother, every time someone would arrive, Mother would be over there with something. So she was sort of an informal one-person staff parish relations committee, because she was always there for the pastor and their family. But it went both ways of all the support and friendship and everything that came back of being next door, not only to the parsonage, but came back from this church. And also through the scouting program that also came back through the church, through the church. And I think of three men who had a very big influence on my brother's life and on my life from this church were Phil Baker, Dave Knowles, and Bob Jolly. Those three men were very active in the Scouts, in the leadership, and had a big effect on my brother's life and on mine as well. So it was a two-way street. Mom had some hobbies. You might have seen some indications in there was mentioned about her ham radio. She first started off collecting rocks. She would tumble rocks, she would polish them. Then she started getting some excellent, actually very good museum specimens, and those can be seen at the Children's Museum. And then, of course, she got into ham radio, and if you haven't been to her house, you'll see that there's a 50-foot steel tower behind her house with a nice antenna on top, so she could talk to her friends around the world. And every Sunday morning at 11 o'clock, it's correct, she would talk with a group of ham radio operators it was called the Foreign Service Net. It was a group that met together to connect hams at overseas postings around the world. And she really, really enjoyed that. And she never forgot anybody. She remembered relatives and friends. You could ask her about someone that whom she knew as an aunt or a cousin, and when they lived in New Mexico or Arizona, and she would remember all of that. And in the process of being a teacher for 22 years, she also knew and educated hundreds of students. They all did well. Some really excelled. I mentioned the Southwest and Arizona, and she lived there most of her formative years. So from the late 20s up until the mid-30s, that's probably the one place that she lived more than any other until she moved to Oak Ridge. Her father was a medical doctor, essentially working in the VA hospital, so they moved quite a bit. But in closing, I wanted to, if you're welcome to see it, Mother, I don't know if you ever know about the magazine Arizona Highways. It's a very popular one outside Arizona. But there was also at the time a magazine called New Mexico, basically their version of Arizona Highways. And I'd like to read a poem. If you know what a yucca plant is, it's a desert plant. And I'd like to read this poem. It's called Yucca in Bloom. Snow falls on the yucca, stately and white, winter blossoms of nature's apparel, dropping of stems in acquiescence of snowbells of summer, blooming once more. Elizabeth Hayes Jones. Thanks, Mom, for everything, for over your 103 years. We love you.
Mom liked to use clipboards, so I'm using a clipboard. And there's something special about this as well. Thank you, Phil. Professional speaker giving me a cue. Take your mask off. I want to thank you all for being here, present and online. I know it's wonderful to be able to welcome people who might not be physically able to be here, either by distance or by their condition. And I want to thank you, everybody, for all you've done for Mom all these years. And of course, she gave back. That's who she was. But there were so many people. And they say it takes a village to raise a child. It also takes a village to companion an elder. And you all were there for her, and I thank you. She meant a lot to so many people. I know people have already talked about her interests, and I covered all her interest in geology. She loved natural history, current events. She kept up to date with what was going on, her ham radio. She also loved the arts. Wonderful time I had. She came to see me one time, and we took the train to D.C., and we spent the day. We actually spent a couple nights. I had a couple nights. It was a weekend. And we went through the art museums. We went to the Capitol. We did all the stuff on the D.C. Mall, and that's where she got those prints of the post-impressionists. And she loved music, all kinds of music. At one time, you walk into the house, there was a piano and an organ. And played both beautifully. She also, I'm remembering, she also played the recorder for a while, but that didn't work so well because the cat would bite her on the ankles when she played the recorder. But she loved the music, she loved poetry, she loved theater, she especially loved Shakespeare. She, as you know, she was a teacher, but she was also a lifelong learner. I think a wonderful example and a story that meant so much to her is when she worked at Cold Spring Harbor. She had a job to She was running an errand, and she went into the lab of Barbara McClintock. And Barbara McClintock stopped what she was doing and was explaining her research to Mom. But knowing Mom probably asked a lot of very good questions. And, but I think it was just an example for her. Teaching was embedded in her life. I think of Parker Palmer, Let Your Life Speak. Teaching was just embedded in what she did. I have a memory of when she was making an angel food cake. I was too young to separate the eggs without getting the yolk and the whites, and then it wouldn't work. So she was separating the eggs out. She was showing me how to do it. And as she dropped the yolks into the separate bowl, she was teaching me cell division. So very much a Mom thing to do. And when we were measuring things, I said, do we measure to the bottom of that little edge or the top of the little edge? And she says, well, that's the meniscus. So, and then as John mentioned, I think a really tough time for her, but the lesson when she went back to work, I was 12. And for a woman, the message was the power, importance of having a good education, the power and importance of having excellent work experience, and what she was able to do. And we mentioned third grade. Her first classes going back into teaching weren't just third grade, they were split grades. There were so many kids, they didn't have enough for a full third and a full fourth, so she was teaching third and fourth. The reason she took up geology, it was kind of interesting, is that the principal in the teacher staff meeting said, oh, I've got this sample box of rocks. Is anybody willing to, sort them out? Finally she says, I'll do it. And that's how she got into geology. She was going around. I haven't found a rock hammer, but it's in the house. I haven't found it yet. She was a natural researcher. She would have been, I think, in another generation, she would have been a remarkable scientist. She had an organized, incisive mind. I mean, as we went to prepare the service, of course, there's a folder. Inside it are the instructions. This is what I want. This is the music. These are the readings. And she had a list of readings. Choose from these. Don't do them all. She when she had a process for when she made decisions and when she was faced with tough decisions, as she was at the end of her life. And she went about it the same way. She educated herself. She said, okay, what am I up against? What do I need to know? I need to learn about what I'm dealing with. Find out what my options are, get clarity about those options, and then be responsible for my own decision. And I can say that the decision she made at the end of her life was a great gift to us, that she made that decision for herself, and I think a great tribute to her autonomy and her agency and her mind that she kept to the end of her life. She was pragmatic, and I think a great example of this is she's a role model. And an example is when she stopped driving. Okay, I'm not going to go to the farm anymore. I'm not going to get on the interstate anymore. I'm not going to drive at night anymore. Okay, so she did that, and then she stopped driving when she was 90. She did her own taxes till she was 95. She stopped doing them, but she did all the paperwork. She did the worksheets up right before she turned 100. She did all the worksheets. But she stopped doing them herself because she said, I can't see the forms. And but she says, I've got a master's degree. I should be able to do this. And now the clipboard. And Reverend Jenny talked about her caring for people. This clipboard she had in her room at Commonwealth. And on this clipboard, and especially after the stroke, her writing is not really great. But on this clipboard, all the different caregivers who came in she would try to write down their names, or if she couldn't, she'd have them write their names, because she wanted to get their names right. She wanted to connect with them. And she was doing that up until just a few days before the end. It's a words of wisdom for Mom. This first is from her grandmother. It's Marcia Atchison Hayes, but she was called Martha, her mother's mother. Make young friends. Keep making friends. Make young friends. If you get really old, you're going to lose all your friends. So make young friends, keep making friends. And she did that. She loved being alive. She absolutely loved being alive. She loved a good conversation. She loved to watch the sky. She loved the stars. A few days before she died, she and I happened to have been both of us separately, and when I called her, as I did every day, she said she'd seen the evening star, and I said, so did I. So she liked watching the stars, the clouds. I'm sure that came from particularly being in the Southwest. She loves to watch the birds. She enjoyed watching the birds, the sky, the stars. She loved being alive, and she said being in a better place is right here, right now. So for her, and in memory of her, be in this place. Be here now. Be with those you love. Treasure the present moment. So, I love you, Mom. You'll always be in my heart.
In June of 1980, the Archer family packed up their belongings in Fort Oglethorpe, Georgia, to move to 107 Ulena Lane in Oak Ridge to become a part of the staff of First United Methodist Church of Oak Ridge. And after we arrived and began the process of moving in, there was a knock at the door and a greeting from a neighbor with a big smile on her face, bearing chocolate cake and lemonade. And I remember that well. And introducing herself, hello, I'm Betty next door. For the next 41 and a half years, she was Betty next door. And Laura, and their almost daily phone conversations, was Laura next door. Phone conversations always began with, is this Betty next door? And Betty would always say, it certainly is. And then the words would flow sometimes for a few minutes, sometimes for an hour. She had a deep love for a lot of things, her family, her church, the children that she taught, a number of things that showed who she was. Betty was a master at loving and caring for people. You never wondered how she felt about you. She always built people up. I've heard people say that as their children were in her class, that was one of the most exciting times of their lives, because she created an opportunity for children to learn and to grow and to expand their life and their vision. Her life was filled with love of neighbor and friends and persons around the world via ham radio. Her family has already reflected that love and caring for others, and they themselves became a reflection of her care and love, working with scouts and with advocacy for persons in need and community interested in neighbors. Betty was so intelligent and so keen, and had such a keen sense of humor. One day when she was showing Laura around Glenwood Elementary School, they had a big open area at the front office, in case you didn't know, the building, and the band was practicing. And as they walked by the band practicing, it sounded pretty rough. And Betty said to Laura, you know, you hear how they sound today. At the end of the year, it'll be pretty much the same, only faster. You've heard a lot about Betty in the last few minutes. I can't add anything to that would be more impressive to you, other than just to simply say that she was a lovely person who cared deeply for others and showed that through her faith and through her caring, reaching out to touch the lives of all that she lived with and worked with. May we join now in the responsive reading. We need one another when we mourn and would be comforted.
We need one another when we are in trouble and afraid.
We need one another when we are in despair, in temptation, and need to be recalled to our best selves again.
We need one another when we would accomplish some great purpose and cannot do it alone.
We need one another in the hour of success, when we look for someone to share our triumphs.
We need one another in the hour of defeat, when the encouragement we might endure and stand.
We need one another when we come to die, and would have gentle hands to prepare us for the journey. Hear this reading from the New Testament, 1 Corinthians chapter 13. If I speak in the tongues of men and of angels, but have not love, I am a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. And if I have prophetic powers and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith so as to remove mountains, but have not love, I am nothing. If I give away all that I have, and if I deliver my body to be burned, but have not love, I gain nothing. Love is patient and kind. Love is not jealous or boastful. It is not arrogant or rude. Love does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice at wrong, but rejoices in the right. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never ends. As for prophecies, they will pass away. As for tongues, they will cease. As for knowledge, it will pass away. For our knowledge is imperfect, and our prophecy is imperfect. But when the perfect comes, the imperfect will pass away. When I was a child, I spoke like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I gave up childish ways. For now we see in a mirror dimly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, then I shall understand fully, even as I have been fully understood. So faith, hope, love abide, these three, but the greatest of these is love. May God bless the reading and the hearing of his holy word. Amen.
Let us pray. Gracious, wise, and generous Spirit of love, we come before you today with a mixture of feelings. But most strong is a feeling of gratitude for Betty, for who she was, for what she did, for what she's taught us, for her spirit, but mostly for her love. Guiding us, teaching us, showing us what matters most in this life, in this world, and that is caring for one another. We thank you for her life here and all that it has given us. And we ask that as we remember her, may her spirit of inquisitiveness, of generosity, of grace, of peace, of pragmatics, but of kindness, may it grow in our hearts, and may it guide us always as we strive to be the kind and generous person that Betty was. So as we all prepare to continue on in this life without her, may we be open to her spirit being with us. May we be grateful for who she was and all that she gave. And may we trust in the ever-present, abounding love, which is your grace. Guide us, love us, and lead us. And it's in your holy name we pray. Amen. When I would visit Betty, we would usually talk, but sometimes words just didn't seem like enough. And that is when I would turn to music. I am part of a group that sings with people and for people, either in the hospital as they are close to dying, or in nursing homes or any kind of facility. And we several times sang for Betty. And when I visited her just days before she died, I sang this song, "We are all just walking each other home." And when I met with Marie and with John to plan this service, we decided that this truly was a fitting benediction.
We are all just walking each other home. 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 We are all just walking